Okay, I start for the recordings. Okay, as I said, in this training made of 3 modules, we will learn how to develop with MapStore and how to create your plugins, your own plugins, and other technical details useful for daily development in MapStore. Tips and tricks, various things, and also in the its integration in Genode. The first module is basically a checksum of the technologies used by MapStore and a small introduction to that, and we will follow also an integration to understand what is a particular library used in MapStore that requires a little of knowledge, additional knowledge to get to understand. Then in the second module, we will go deep into the MapStore architecture and MapStore developing, and we will learn how to develop a plugin. And in the third module, instead we will see how MapStore is integrated in Genode, and we will see the main modules that made the integration, the Python part, and but mostly the front-end part in order to integrate your plugins also in Genode. We will see also the limitation of the current integration and the future things that will be integrated in the future. Let me admit. I'm checking the participants in order to. I have to stop to share my screen in order to accept more participants. Hi, Edgar. Edgar Malawi is not new to me. I know it.
Hi,
Oh,
Lorenzo.
hi. Nice to hear you.
Yeah, you're not new to me.
Hi.
You're my mentor at some point in time.
Yes. Nice to hear you again.
Yeah, actually, I was excited to meet you too. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, Haji, too. Okay. As I was saying to your colleagues, I was explaining how the training is made of, and it's made of 3 modules. One that explains more or less the front-end technologies behind MapStore, one about the architecture, and in the second module we will learn also developing in MapStore, and the third module is dedicated to the Genode integration. Okay, and the main references where you can find almost all the information that I'm telling are in the, of course, the MapStore documentation that is increased a lot in these 2 releases of 2020, and we have now a big documentation about developer tech, and so a lot of guidelines and how-tos and information about configuration. It is a big documentation that, of course, requires a lot of time to read, but with this course, I think you will get all the main information to go then in documentation if you need and catch your needings. Okay. As I said, this first module is an introduction to the MapStore technologies. It can be new to someone that didn't use the technologies behind MapStore and never used the React Redux or in general Ecmascript. So I'll do a quick introduction about the technologies used in MapStore. I'm going to start about this model. First of all, questions about this first part? Okay. I'll after this first part, I'll stop for a question time to make you understand, to make you able to give me more detailed questions if you need. Anyway, if you have something that is not clear or please tell me, and please raise your hand, and I can give you the opportunity to talk. Okay. As a developer on front end, I've seen evolving the technologies over time, and this is an interactive chart available on internet of the technologies created and in the front end and in web development in general. As you can see, the complexity is increasing. There are a lot of things new. From 2008, we started with HTML5 that included more things to the previous and basics of HTML, CSS, and so on. Then also CSS3 has been introduced. Also geolocation capabilities has been introduced to allow browsers to share the location, and many other things like different touch events for mobile devices, WebGL to render 3D object, and so on, and many other technologies, and especially from 2009, sorry, from 2015, the standard of JavaScript evolved a lot, introducing a lot of new functionalities and a lot of new syntax, and this helps a lot developers to write the code quickly and write code that is effectively readable by the ones that knows these new features. Anyway, in the last 5 years, JavaScript exploded in many libraries, in many contributions, especially for with a lot of libraries behind the JavaScript ecosystem, and so this caused also what front-end developers in general, but also backend, because JavaScript was introduced also on the backend side, in what we call JavaScript fatigue. This means that there is a lot of things to understand, more than the standard JavaScript that we had only 5 years ago, in order to get in the JavaScript development, and this is of course an obstacle for developers. But when you start using these new functionalities with new libraries, you start understanding this system, you may be able in theory to be more effective in development. Moreover, as I said, there are a lot of libraries, so this explosion has the opposite, as the problem that there are many technologies, many small libraries used here and there, and when one developer start working on the front end can be a lot confused because there are many libraries, many things that you don't know, you don't understand, or you cannot get into quickly. And so starting developing with a library in 2020 may be very difficult. So in this first part, I'd like to introduce the technologies behind MapStore and in JavaScript in general, so you can get a little bit more confident with the code of MapStore, and you can understand the code of MapStore, check it, and also get inspiration from that. In order to develop your own plugin. Why this explosion? First of all, as I said, many developers worked on the front-end side, but we had also a lot of new things to think. Only 5 years ago, but when I started, web applications were not so common. Websites were not so powerful as application. But in the last years, JavaScript has been used for develop single-page application that became a lot common, a lot more common. Instead of having programs, you have an application that you can access from your internet browser, and you can work online with them. They became very common, and many products are developed only for the web. Think about Google Documents or or many other tools, and also the mobile gets in. So all the mobile applications the JavaScript have to adapt to mobile phones, to different screen sizes. Then we had a lot of traffic more, so we needed also some caching, some other functionality that was not required to JavaScript and to web application in general in the past. And for this, you need more libraries, more syntax helpful things, and so on to manage this kind of complexity. For this reason, the many programming paradigms has been developed in order to satisfy these requirements. As I say, to simplify programming, unit testing, or fasten development and maintainability. And these technologies are, first of all, Ecmascript, that is the official name of JavaScript. And it originally was, the original name was Ecmascript, but JavaScript has been introduced as name from Oracle. At the time that it introduced its name, the company Oracle was named Sun. Sun has been bought by Oracle, but anyway, it was a commercial name, that because at the age of the when JavaScript has been named as it is, it was Java was so common, so having a name that reminds Java was commercially useful. But the official name, when it is being developed, it was Ecmascript. Now we restarted using Ecmascript or AS to identify all the new developments in and the new versions of JavaScript, but they are the same. The original, developed in 2009, Ecmascript 5 is most used in recent years, and you probably, and I started working with it. For the most younger people, they may be started from 2050. They may have find 2000 Ecmascript 6 or ES6, and then every year new features has been introduced, and now we have Ecmascript 11 that is that has been developed in 2020. We use some of these new function also from Ecmascript 2020, and I will explain them during this course. Other than Ecmascript, MapStore in general uses technologies that I like React, that is a front-end view library that essentially provides the from the visual components and the part it provides the system to display some HTML with JavaScript, using JavaScript. It's a library that does it essentially the view part of the application. Then it's a library that is that has been developed by Facebook in just a patch. Another famous library that has been developed at the same time was Angular from Google, the main opponent. And then there is other than from the view part, Redux, it's another important library in the MapStore ecosystem that is a state manager, essentially. And then we...
sorry, Lorenzo.
Yeah.
Are you supposed to be sharing a screen or because...
I stopped sharing my screen.
Okay.
Okay. I explained a lot of... I explained a lot of things without sharing. Did you see this chart, these parts, and so on? Okay, I forgot to share it. Anyway, as I said, Ecmascript is this is the list of Ecmascripts, and this is the good to know because I had to explain some code, so it was hard without the screen. Just a second. Probably I had a message in the chat, and yes, it was from you. Yeah, sorry. Okay, and we were here. So, as I said, we had Ecmascript. We have React, that is view part. We had Redux, that is the state manager, and we have RxJS. That is another library used often in MapStore. You are not forced to use RxJS in order to use MapStore for simple things, so you can avoid it. It's useful if you need to do complex asynchronous data flows or something like that. We will see it later. And just for show you what I've shown until now without sharing my screen, this is the chart I was saying that is on internet that shows more or less the technologies introduced. These are the slides I used to explain the needings or this evolution. These are the libraries. These are the main technologies and we are using, we are explaining. And then this is the list of Ecmascript versions from 2009. This is the standard JavaScript, as I said, and from 2050, Ecmascript started to explode with new functionalities that are very useful. And now I'm going to explain them. First of all, questions about this part? Okay. I start explaining you some of the main parts of the syntax. I will not be I will not go too much in details because you can anyway but in detail you can anyway explore whatever you find in this list while you are developing, because having contact directly with things is, I think, is better than a frontal explanation of the syntax. Just a second. Okay. Okay. First of all, as I the first part of this is just a second. Okay, welcome. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. I introduced for the ones that arrived, I introduced the first part of the course that is that explains basically the technologies behind MapStore. I will start with the new syntax of JavaScript. The first part, the first point of the new syntax of Mobster that is often used also by React library is it was used in the first version of React, is going to be abandoned during the time for a more functional approach, but you will find because MapStore started to together with React, more or less, so with the first versions, and so you will find a lot of class-based components in MapStore. So this syntax is important. JavaScript didn't have a class constructor, a syntax to create classes. Basically because it was based on a prototype system, object system. In Ecmascript 6, this has been introduced. It was initially a syntactic sugar, so it's nothing new. In the first version you created prototypes with this new syntax, but with this new in the latest version, classes has more details, more things particular of that belongs only to classes. Anyway, for our purposes they are the same. Basically, class can be created by creating using this syntax, class, and then the name of the class. You can include a constructor that has been invoked on when you create a new object of this class. and here you can assign to this object the some values coming from the invocation of the new syntax creation here, and you can and then you can add some methods to components in order to invoke some methods as well as they are in classes in other languages like C, Java, and so on. Also, you can also extend some base classes, and in this way the constructors will be created in cascade and so on, as well as the other languages, as well as Java, for instance, and so on. In React, we will find often this syntax that will extend React components with base. You can create your own components by extending the base React component. So we will find this new syntax in MapStore. Moreover, one quick version of the function has been introduced that can be written this way. Just a second, I have to admit new attenders, and I am not able to do it without stopping sharing my screen. Okay. Arrow functions has been introduced in Ecmascript 6, and they are a context syntax for writing functions. Usually, you can write here. I have the console of JavaScript. You can open it by Control-Shift-I, or from here, Tools, Developer Tools, and then you can open the console here on the bottom, or here as a tab. And let me detach it from the. Yes, here I have the console of JavaScript, so we can try this syntax. Usually, functions are written in this way. You can create a function named, for instance, test that does return hello, and then you can invoke test, and this is the return value that is hello. Here we have a shorter version of the syntax that allow you to you can even create it this way, that is more conscious. The basic syntax is this: the arrow function, the fat arrow. You can use equal and measure symbols, and the parentheses are for the arguments. Return is implicit if you don't use the brackets, and if you have only one line, the return is implicit. So, and these are anonymous functions, and they can be assigned to a variable. For instance, var myFun, for instance, multiply. Here you can assign it to a variable. In JavaScript, it is very common to use functions as variables. This is a basic of functional programming. So, for instance, I have a number here, and I can to num2, and I can return num multiplied by num2. And if I call multiply to 3, I have 6, as you can expect. Also, if you have only one argument, you can even avoid the first parenthesis. So for instance, if I have a function like this, like var test2 equal a, let's call it add1. Here, this is the syntax. The parentheses for one argument only can be omitted, and the return can be omitted. So you can, for instance, add 1, call add 1 to 2, and you will have 3, for instance. If you have to return an object, here we have a mismatch with parentheses. So if you have to return an object, you will have to use this syntax. So for instance, if you have to create a function called makeObject, you have argument here as argument of the function. Here you have to use the round parentheses between these brackets, in order to avoid the mismatching between the syntax of the function, explicit function, and the syntax of the object that is uses the same brackets. So, for instance, attribute. For instance, here you can implicit return an object using this syntax, make object equal, and you can call make object, for instance, to 2, and you will have an object returned that has an attribute with argument 2. Of course, you can define as all these functions also anonymous, and you can, for instance, write the console.log and call them directly. Oh, sorry. Or call, of course, other functions, make object of 2, and so on. And you can write a normal function as you, and you can call it directly here. Sorry. And you will, if you run it, this doesn't return nothing, but only calls these functions internally. And arrow functions has a particular definition of these for those who have seen the old JavaScript. They have seen that the definition of this in JavaScript is very complex because it depends on the execution context. Instead, arrow function, this depends on the definition context. So if I, for instance, create a function inside a class, arrow function inside a class, here, if I define an arrow function here, the scope is the definition scope. So here, for instance, if I return this for a function here that is defined in the window, let me return this. It returns the window because it's defined in window context. But if I create a class and here I put a method inside that, and I create here I create a function. Let me be more, go on more than one line because it is not clear. Here I have a method here. I create a arrow function here. And execute it. Anyway, I can execute it from, and then I create a new test class. Create a new test class, and I call the method test method. I add these created in this context, that is the test class. Instead, if I returned simply these from this class instead, here I'm going to redefine the class, and I return simply this in a normal function. In this case, test method. If I add a normal function, sorry, here, instead of having let me go back in the history. Okay. If I add instead a normal function here, this function depends on the execution context. In this context, we have the same, but may in some, if I return instead this function and execute it, I will have this different this. If I return this function and execute it, I will have, instead of having this the class in the scope, I may have some different behavior that is not wanted. I know this is a particular thing. This is strange for not JavaScript users, but for JavaScript users, it's very common to have problems with this. With our function, you will not have any problems with this object because it's well defined and on definition time. Let's go more in. Okay, so we have seen classes, our functions. There are also some other way of defining variables. Instead of var, you can define const variables equal my const. That can, if I try to assign the variable a const variable, I am not allowed on runtime. This is not. This is if I define instead var a my var var a, and I try to assign another value again. With const, I'm not allowed. Moreover, let var is an old syntax term of JavaScript that has a function scope. So var definition is valid for all the function. Instead, if you need a block scoped variables, that is almost 99% of the times you need a variable, you need only in the block. So you can use the new let syntax to define these variables. Let me close this console in order to reset the variables I created to avoid new name is matching with variable defined before. And so, as I said, classes, arrow functions, quick way to write functions, const and let, you will find them very well, very often. Then there are some practical things to create objects, to access to objects, sub elements. So if I have an object, a nested object like this, that has attribute 1 and nested attribute 2 and nested attribute 3. Typically, when I try to access to an object, if one of the part is null, to dot at1 dot at2, I can do it. But if one of these is null, at2 for at3, I have typically an error like this. This syntax, this was typically avoided using this end that for JavaScript has a particular behavior that helps to skip these errors, but has some unwanted behaviors in case we have, for instance, values like 0 or empty strings or false values is not so you may find some unpredictable things, or you can quickly create bugs. In this case, instead with this new syntax called optional chaining, you can quickly access to one of the attributes, and if for instance the first one doesn't exist, I don't have any error and it returns undefined. Together with this, we had nullish coelish. That is a strange word to assign a default value if this is nullish. So typically, a nullish object is in JavaScript is an object that is null or undefined. That are two ways to define non-existing things. Undefined is typically an unexplicitly null object, while null is explicitly wanted to be null, because you have to, but by default, things that doesn't exist are undefined. Instead, if you assign a particular value null to a variable, you want to assign it, and so you have an explicit assignment, and so you are sure that you are using null. You want it to be a null object. So this is a way to assign default value if they are null or undefined, nothing more. So as I said, classes, arrow functions, const let, optional chaining that allows to access nested objects, and assign default values with nullish coelish. That is these two question marks syntax. These two, this and this has been introduced in Ecmascript 11, so they are new of this year. Questions until now? Let me see the chat. Okay, I can go further. Okay. Moreover, there is a very useful operator that we'll find very often in MapStore, and it is the spread operator. The spread operator can be used for objects or for the definition is quite a little cryptic, because a spread operator allows an interval to expand the places where are 0 or more arguments that are expected. It's strange, but I'll explain it Basically, spread operator is this three-point operator, and is very similar to the to the rest operator that has the same syntax. Now you will see them used dually, and let's see first the spread operator. Spread operator allows to spread an object inside another object, and it can be used for arrays or for objects to spread all the elements contained in it into another object. For instance, here we have an array of 3. We define an array. We can start using let just to make you confident with the new syntax. Let array, let's define an array of 3 and 4, and then let's create a new array that has 1, 2, and then you can spread the first array inside this. This will create a new array with the concatenation of this array and this other array. I can even create add points here, add elements before and after, and this is very helpful to concatenate arrays or concatenate the same syntax can be used for object. For instance, if I have an object like this, let's see, I used some wrong thing. Unfortunately, the slides doesn't have the correct double apex. Okay, I already defined the object. I can delete it. I cannot. Okay, let's call it object 2. Object 2, obj2 as these attributes, and if I create a const new object, I can spread all these 2 arguments inside the other new object. J, C, C, and so on, D, D, and the new object as I used, okay, I defined before this object, so I used obj instead of obj2. So here I can show you as important as you can see here, I cannot assign the new object anything else because it is const. So I denied. So let me close this console and reopen a new one in order to get the okay. I have to reverse. Oh, okay. I cannot work with this. Let's as we did before. Let's call it object 2. Oh, okay. I have to close. Sorry, I opened it in the same tab. So this is the reason why I already defined that variables there. Okay. For instance, here I have a non-obj. Let's use A for the exercise in order to, for instance, okay, I'm stupid because I opened it again in the same context. Let me close it and open a new console. Okay. Oh, now I can. As I say, the const new object, I can assign, I can do this, and I will see new object that is made of A, B, and C, D. If I create new, this is very useful because you can override existing my old existing attributes, spreading them inside them. So here, in this case, obj has the attribute A defined. So I will override this one with my new one. So here, new obj2. I will have the A, and this has been overridden. They are in order, and so it's very useful to create objects, to merge objects, and it's very used inside MapStore. And we are almost there. I don't want to bore you too much with the syntax things, but they are important because they are often used in MapStore. So yes, let me include the other attenders. Okay, so I was saying there is the spread operator that can be used for arrays in order to concatenate arrays and so and spread them inside the other arrays and so on, and the same can be done for objects. Please, I have to mute some of you because I'm hearing some noise. Okay. As well as you can spread object, you can extract object with this destructuring syntax, and you can from this new object you can get the variable A or the variable 2 by simply creating a variable with the same name. For instance, let's see, let A be equal from new object 2. In this way, I create a variable A and get the attribute A from this new object 2, new object 2. So for instance, A in this case has the A and B as B. I can even change the name using my var using this syntax. And in this case, I get the attribute A from the object and assign it to a variable, my var1. This is the same of doing let my var1 equal new obj2 dot A. This is a shortener version for this. Of course, if this as well as this and the same for B, and this is the same of creating let A equal new obj2 dot A, and the same for B, let B and new obj2. As you can see, this syntax is very long, this syntax is very short and is understandable, and on a quick look you can identify what you are doing. As I said, a similar as I said, a similar syntax used for the spread operator has a similar the same syntax of another dual operator, that is the rest operator, that does the structuring with that does the opposite of the concatenation. It extracts the remaining values. So the difference is that the spread operator is used on the right side, and the rest operator is used on the left side of the expression, on the assignment, or in a function. This spread operator helps to get the rest of the values. For instance, here I can create, I can do my var A, my var B, and then rest. Then I have rest object with the new object 2 as a C and D, and other than A and B, and the rest is G and D, and is assigned to this variable. So rest variable contains the rest of the operator assigned by that. The same things can be done using arrays. For instance, if I have an array 1, 2, 3, 4, I can do var n1. The structuring can be used also in array with the same syntax. This means get the first and the second element of the array, and then I can use this spread syntax, but is the rest operator in this case. Rest of array to extract values from the array. And in this case, n1 as the first element, and 2 as the second element, and rest of the array, variable contains the remaining value. Is an array made of the rest of the elements. Rest operator can be used also for argument of functions or arrow functions. So for instance, if we have an arrow function defined like this, a order args, return order args, here, if we call this function, we have assigned this function get order args. If we call this function with a series of arguments, the first argument is assigned to A, and the other args 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are passed in this variable inside the function. Okay, now I think I bored too much, so maybe if you want to do some questions or ask something more, you can, so you can relax a little bit. If you are okay, I can proceed. Otherwise, I can stop a little. Okay, if you don't tell me nothing, I can proceed. Okay. Not too much more, because it's becoming boring. Of course, in a function you can use default values using this syntax, as well as other languages. For instance, you can create var function with default arg, I didn't assign it. In this case, I assigned one to the I assigned one to the our first argument, and if I call this function without arguments, A will get the 1 value by default. We have almost finished with the syntax. The only thing that are remaining are array new functions that allow you to create new. If I have an array like this, I can apply new methods introduced in this language as map, for instance, that allow to pass a function as argument. And this map function returns a new array, processing every argument and every element, and with this function, and returning one value for each element processed. So, for instance, if I apply this function to the map, I map this function to this array, I have a new array with all the elements multiplied by 2. I can, for instance, add the 2 to the elements, and for instance, here you have 1 plus 2, or 2 plus 2, and 3 plus 2. Another method added to the arrays in Ecmascript 6 is filter, that allow to get a function to exclude some elements for the array, and returns, even this returns a new array. All this function doesn't modify the array, so they are very useful for immutability in order to avoid all the variables to be mutated, and so have unpredictable state. For instance, here I can filter all the elements that are greater than 2 or greater than 1, and it returns a new array with the elements that satisfy this function. There is another operator, more complex operator. I'll not go deep down into this because it's not so much, but anyway, this reduce allows to process an array and returns whatever you want. You can, for instance, use it to create some summaries or some other arrays yet, but with this reduces a more generic map version, because it allows to get use an accumulator in our variable in order to accumulate results. For instance, here I can create this, use this syntax to sum old values and accumulate them. So I can sum the first element with the second, and then create store in the accumulator this sum, and then apply this sum to the next value, and so on. And this is very helpful if you have to process some values and get a single result or a single checksum or something like that. And this function can be combined, so you can use map because they returns array. They can be chained, and so you can do a map that adds 1, then a filter, and then reduce, and so on. Reduce, of course, return is not mandatory to return an object. It can return whatever it wants. It returns the final value of the accumulator, and so if you can concatenate it only if it returns an array too. Otherwise, you cannot add the map to an object that doesn't add map method. For instance, in this case, I add 1 to all the elements, and then I filter all the elements measured than 1. But if I change something, you can see there is a difference. Okay. I finished with the new syntax. That is the most boring part. let's summarize. So we have classes, arrow functions, new variable declarations, syntax, quick versions of syntax to get access to nested methods or assign default values, to spread objects inside and merge them, and or to extract variables from objects or from arrays. We have ways to get the rest of the extraction, so we can extract many things, many strategies, and we can use many strategies to extract pieces of variables and other from object, or to spread inside them, or get arguments and so on. We have many syntax highlights, and then we have a way to quickly process the arrays in a functional way, more or less. And this is more or less the syntax that we will often find in MapStore. If you take a look at MapStore code and take a look at a plugin, for instance, sorry, if I take a look at plugin, plugins are here. We will see in the next lesson all the structure of MapStore in general. But if you take a look to plugins, you will find classes. This is an old component. You may find ternary operator, but also spread operator is used often to assign variables. And let me find it, some of them, for instance. Now I cannot find the spread operator, but anyway, you can find some. Yes, this is a map on the array, for instance. The second argument of the optional argument of the array is the index of the array. Anyway, this is the map. As you can see, a filter here, a reduce here. So you often find this kind of things when processing arrays or when processing objects. And this is the syntax that we will see later. Anyway, here you can see the spread operator and so on. So it's often used, so it's useful to have an idea of what they are. In order the last thing new to the Ecmascript, other than the syntax things that has been introduced in Ecmascript 6 is the promise. Then after this explanation, we will go deep down into React, and we will see React, Redux, and the libraries included in MapStore. So we will go more near to MapStore. First of all, let's introduce you what are the promise. Basically, when we usually do Ajax calls or asynchronous calls in general in JavaScript in the past, we had typically to call a function and then pass a callback function. Here is passed in line, and this had passing the callback can be useful, but can be manageable some ways, but it has the problem that if you have to do more asynchronous things inside after you get the data, for instance, ask for the data or wait a moment, delay a little bit the response, you may have a chain of asynchronous things. That means a chain of callback calls, and code written in this way becomes quickly hard to maintain, and this was called the callback pyramid of doom. So promise is a pattern for doing asynchronous things. It's not the only pattern used in Mobster for do asynchronous things, but it's a pattern that tries to represent objects to create an object or create a representation of an incomplete operation. This way, representing with a promise an incomplete operation, we have this object that that has been created and represent this operation, and this object has some methods to react to the events of a completion. When the event is complete, you can pass the callback here in the method instead of passing it directly to the function. And you may say, what's the difference? The difference is that if you here inside the callback we return the same representation, the same promise here, you can chain them because you can, if return another promise, you can concatenate to this function, this then calls another callback with the same in this way, and you can concatenate many asynchronous calls. These allow you to transform this callback pyramid of doom into a linear version, a linear pipeline of callbacks. So if you, for instance, you have to do a request to the server to check the presence of the server, and or to check some URLs to do the request to, and then do the effective request to the server. If you don't use promise, you have to do a chain of callbacks, and then if you have some errors to handle or some it's difficult to restart the flow and handle the errors, and it's even not so easy to understand the flow because you are chaining callbacks. You are calling function inside other function inside other function, and it's difficult to follow the execution. Instead, with the syntax is more cleaner. So for instance, here you can call do a Ajax request, then do another Ajax request, and then if some error occurs, you can apply this method in order to handle any error coming from this pipeline. And this is very useful for asynchronous data flows that becomes complex. Ecmascript provides a syntax to create promise. This is the syntax. I don't want too deep into this, but anyway, you can create a new promise using new promise, writing new promise, and then passing a function that has two callbacks here. One to execute if when you want to return. Here you can do some asynchronous things or whatever you want, and one for reject if you have some errors, for instance. And if you call reject somewhere, you will follow in the catch mode. So you create a promise, and then you can call as much functions as you want, and you can chain them together in order to asynchronous data flows. This is not so clear at the beginning, but usually most of the time you will see only this one, only thing like this in MapStore, Axios dot. That is a library to do Ajax calls using promise. This is a library used in MapStore, and you will see often Axios.then something, Axios.get, for instance, that do those get requests to the URL, and you can apply then, and here you can parse the result of the request. Simply, this is this basic syntax that MapStore uses to do asynchronous calls. It uses Axios to do asynchronous calls and then process the results. If you have to do another request inside that, you have only to return again Axios.get the new URL, and then here you will have the result of this request. Here, as you can see, is more linear than having nested callbacks. Okay, with the syntax we have finished. If you want a small break or if you want to put some question, this is the time.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Lorenzo.
Hi.
Thank you very much for this great presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question. I've seen you are using promise.
Yes.
Promise pattern in handling asynchronous data or asynchronous actions.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask about async await pattern. Is that also allowed in MapStore too, or there are some? I've not heard you mentioning that.
Yes. Good question. Let me mute you because I have okay. Thank you. Actually, async await is not used in MapStore. We never used. I think it's allowed in the terms that if you have a browser compatible, it will work, of course. We didn't use it because we started when MapStore started when async and await was not existing, and I'm not so confident with that syntax. I know that exists. I use it a couple of times. It works. Is allowed in general if you in your own project. Most probably in using it in the main product, maybe refused because it's not part of the. We have a lot of technologies yet inside, and so we have to exclude some of them. We are going to define in the future to clean up all the technologies that are going to be replaced with new ones. I give you my opinion on async await. Async await sometimes hides the complexity, so I don't like it personally. But in many simple use cases is very useful, and so you can use it in your own project when we will talk about MapStore projects. You will know better what is a project that you can handle on your own. But in MapStore is not. I never used. We never used async await. Maybe some libraries inside them internally use it, but MapStore is not part of MapStore in general. I hope I replied your question.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay, fine, thanks. Other questions? Do you want a small break, 5 minutes? Because I explained a lot of things, so maybe you can be not confused. Okay, let's do a small break. Let's get back to the at 35. It's okay for you?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, so I have 4 minutes of pause.
4 minutes, yeah,
Okay.
I think is enough. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me pause the recording. Okay, just to have a mental break, I explain the features. I'd like to show you a little bit MapStore in order to have, instead of seeing a code all the time, you can see some graphical user interface and some web pages and maps. So you can have a little fun seeing functionalities and so on. Before to restart, just a second, let me share again. So before to restart taking a look at the code, let's see a little bit the functionality also of MapStore that you may have missed. First of all, for the people that is relatively new to MapStore or don't know it, MapStore is typically a couple of things at the same time. Is a framework to develop a web application and it's a product by itself. During this course, we will see MapStore as a framework to develop your own applications, and MapStore as a product. We will see as from the developer point of view. So we will see the structure of the product of MapStore and the parts that is made too. But I'd like to introduce a little bit more in the product and the new features in order also to have a break from code and take a look to the functionalities. Mainly the MapStore product by itself is a Java application that can be installed on a Tomcat or whatever server container you want. And it basically is application to share maps, to share contents that have typically special things inside that. So in the new version, in this new version of MapStore, we have introduced some other contents. Typically, the main content type of MapStore is a map. Here you can have a map that is basically a set of layers with some other things inside that. And here you can add layers from catalogs. You can handle many. The catalog is basically a browser for some well-known protocols to browse some layers, some special data to add to a map. Here you can add some layers from some servers. Here and that, for instance, you can add this. These are the UNESCO items in Italy, or for instance, here you can add the layers from Tasmania. Now these particular layers in this server has problems. Anyway, for instance, here you can add the raster data. Okay, I'm using a server that is having problem now. Anyway, we can, for instance, inspect data. We have some way to filter this data, and let me use a more stable server. Let me see. Okay. This is the same. Okay. Just another attempt, and then I'll okay, this works. Okay, here I have I can browse data and filter them. There are some features here and there that has been introduced to create the filtered versions of the layers. For instance, here I can filter by attribute. For instance, the state name states that as a name in the name. Sorry, I have to do this. State name that has a name in the name. We can also do some cross-layer filter. So use another layer that I can use is method. Don't take into account this tool for the moment. Here there is this is a list of method landings during the history, and I can even filter data by intersecting with other layers. For instance, here I can use the states to get the method landings that happened in Alabama, for instance. And as you can see, the layer is filtered by this. Or for instance, for Colorado, this is I can filter layers with other filters. I have this is also a temporal layer, so I can reset the filter, and here I have if I have some temporal data, I can browse and manage the time. I don't know if you have seen these features anyway. I can go here by here and element by element here. This is a nearly map because of method landings. So I can go here by here to browse data. Anyway, this is a timeline to browse time data that has time dimension, for instance. There are many features like that. I can even create some widgets that do some statistics on the layers. For instance, I can do a chart of the states are grouped by region, by subregion, summing, doing a sum on the land of the land kilometers, so on the I can, for instance, create a chart that shows for each state region. So this is the mountain region, that is the central one. This is the Pacific region, that is this three state, and I summed, for instance, the data on that layer. And moreover, I can add more widgets and so on, and share these maps with my colleagues, saving them. For instance, if I log in, I can save the map and share with some user groups and so on. So I can, for instance, share with my collaborators and allow them to edit this map only to view and so on. Maps are one of the contents in MapStore. The other contents are dashboards that are mainly some. They are similar to the widgets. Here there is and these tools are synchronized and the dashboards can be created and add the widgets with some, for instance, text, but also charts, tables, and so on. You can see dashboards here in the demo, for instance. Let me include the other ones that are joining. Hi. So as I said, you can share with your colleagues, with your groups, with the groups that belongs to MapStore, that of users in MapStore. You can share maps, and the maps can be can contain data from very well-known layers, and dashboards are different. Are a set of widgets, a set of small windows that that can contain charts and maps and legends and so on, and they are all synchronized. So as well as you zoom, the chart are updated to show, for instance, only the data in this viewport, or I can even filter here by for instance, writing a string here, or by date, or so on, and so on. As you can see, as well as I zoom, I have less values here in the chart, and so on. And you can create new charts and connect, for instance, a counter of this point of let me see, for instance, if I inspect this layer, this map, I have this layer with this name. Is a name in Italian. I'm sorry for that, but this is a layer of works, of pending works in this city, and you can, for instance, add the counter that counts these offers. Okay, I cannot do it in this demo, but anyway, I can, for instance, edit this layer, edit this in order to okay, or to change this chart, for instance, in order to change the chart from chart type or something like that, and so on. And other than dashboards that are very useful to do statistics, to show some data, and there are stories that has been introduced in the latest version of MapStore that allow you to, let me show a simple story, to tell stories with the maps and so on about with a scrolling interface. So you can see this is a typical story that scrolls. They are maps that are working, and these are, for instance, a web page that explains the list of the higher astronomical observatories around the world, and it shows, for instance, the history, and shows a map, and this is interactive, and I can click on the map and see pop-ups, for instance, and go down, and as you can see, when I scroll, the maps change, and I can see information about that, and so on. And I can see even videos, and so, I can include in this. This is a small tutorial. I can skip it I can edit the background, adding videos or maps or background, for instance, here. For instance, I can add instead this map and so on. I can edit whatever I want in order to, or edit the contents here with a easy. I can change the syntax, of course, and the contents, and add more contents here very quickly. For instance, here I can add the new section here and add the background with this image, for instance, and some text here. And here I can go in preview mode and see what is the final result. These are very beautiful in order to do presentations and so on. This is one of the new things. And another new thing is the context. That is a way to define a small subset of. Typically, when you have the map, you have a fixed set of tools here. You cannot choose the tools you have. And if you are administrator and you have the latest version of Mobster, you can even create contexts. So they can contain a subset of tools. As you see here, for instance, you don't have the 3D or some other tools, and you have a preset of maps if you want, and you can create maps based on this context to create a small application. For instance, you can create your own plugin and show it only in this context. So you have a subset of tools of your own, and that is more or less a small application focused to your contents. And it's very useful to do multi-tenant applications with many different tools. As you can see here, you can edit the context by editing the base map and add the plugins you want. MapStore is based on plugins, so every tool in the map, every tool in the home page, and so on are plugin. This search tool is a plugin. This menu is a plugin. These entries are parts of the plugins, and so on. The footer is a plugin, and so on. So they can be plugged and unplugged from the application, and the context tool makes this very useful in this case. And for GeoNode users, MapStore is also a library that provides mainly the viewer, the map viewer. But in the future, we have plans to introduce also these new contents inside GeoNode. We are going to define some in these days. Yes. Next week we will start to define the future of the integration of MapStore in GeoNode in order to introduce this other kind of contents, if possible, of course. So I hope you had a little break from code, so we can go back to the to the JavaScript and restart having an edge. Some questions about what I said?